So we've been talking about this piece in Dogen Zenji's Bendowa that is commonly referred to as the Jijuyu Zanmai section of Bendowa. And in there, he's really specifically talking about the nature of our Zazen practice. And this is usually translated as something like the self receiving and self employing samadhi. So it's a really fundamental and important part of Dogen Zenji's teaching. So last time we talked about uh, this section that talks about dropping off body and mind. And actually, let me just read this little section for you again. So at this point in the writing, Dogen Zenji starts talking about uh, this mutual assistance that he talks about, throughout the text or throughout his teaching. So he starts talking about how the person sitting zazen and all beings and all existence mutually um, benefit each other. And through this little writing, he switches around between the perspectives of the person sitting and the person or the all beings, and then kind of a universal view, a more sort of individual view within the context of that universal view, and then beyond both of those views. But he switches back and forth between those, and so in this particular part, he's talking more about the person sitting and the benefit, you know, of the person sitting, like on an individual level, I think. So, um, yeah, just this little piece here. Therefore, this Zazen person without fail drops off body and mind, cuts away previous tainted views and thoughts, and awakens genuine Buddha Dharma. So just before that, in this, I'll paraphrase, he says, the perfect enlightenment of all things and the person mutually benefit each other, basically in Zazen. So last time we talked, a lot about dropping off body and mind, and we talked about that in the context of Dogen's conversation about dropping off body and mind with his teacher in China. So this is in a writing called the Hokyoki that Dogen Zenji wrote some years after he got back from China and received Dharma transmission from his teacher. But where we left off was Dogen Zenji was kind of questioning his teacher about you know what is the legitimate school of Zen, or what is the legitimate school of Buddhism rather. And he at this point we might remember, we might all remember that Dogen Zenji went to China with a kind of question, um, this original enlightenment teaching. Traditionally, it's said that was kind of the impulse for him to begin investigating Zen. And so at this time, the original enlightenment teaching in the Tendai school, where Dogen Zenji was first ordained, was sort of the foundation of the understanding of, most of the schools in Japan. And it was very popular, teaching at that time. And that teaching is that everything, of course, is enlightenment itself. And there was some way actually that Dogen Zenji encountered people who he thought vastly misunderstood this teaching, who said, if everything is enlightenment, everything is empty, everything is Buddha, we don't have to practice. Just understand that this body and mind is Buddha, and it's okay. You don't have to practice. And so Dogen Zenji didn't understand, or he wanted to understand, and he didn't find any teacher or any teaching he felt that address this issue of, if everything is perfect and light, then why do we have to do anything? Why do we have to practice? So um, he encountered his teacher in his teacher's room, and basically was talking about this issue. I think, and so his teacher basically told him, because Dogen Zenji said to him, what you've just told me, that dropping off body and mind is zazen, and it's the way that we remove the five desires. In other words, it's the way that we remove greed, hatred, and delusion, which is a basic, teaching of Buddhism. The basic, teaching of the Buddha is that we go beyond greed, hatred, and delusion, which is the source of all of our suffering. And so Dogen Zenji said, well, if this is the teaching, then what is the difference between us and the Hinayana schools? At that time, it was thought that the other schools, like the what we would call Theravada today, they didn't have Theravada Buddhism, of course, in Japan, but what we would call, now, sort of the old schools, they would call that the lesser vehicle, sort of the lesser vehicle of Buddhism, and that the higher vehicle is the Mahayana, and that, especially in the Tendai school, all of the different teachings and schools were kind of listed in order of depth. And of course, the Tendai school was the most deep. And then, all the other schools were kind of listed, below that. But it was not, a rejection of any school, actually. So, but Dogen Zenji had a question about this, Tendai teaching, and its relationship to early Buddhism, I think. And so he was expecting from his teacher to hear something really different, that some commentary on original enlightenment, or some rejection of the Shravaka, or the early Buddhist teaching, or maybe even the teaching schools of Tendai, the Tendai teaching, which, as I said, really was founded or based largely on this original enlightenment teaching. And so, his teacher, Tendo Nyojo, told him, how can we reject the teachings of the Buddha? How can we say that the teachings of the Four Noble Truths basically are the three poisonous minds, or, the 12-fold chain? He didn't mention these specifically, but these five desires are basically a way that he was saying, these are the teachings of the Buddha, and we can't reject them. And in our zazen, we go beyond the five desires. So the five desires are the desires created by our five sense organs. So he's really talking about the basic teaching of the Buddha there, that says, when the sense organ meets some object, greed, hatred, and delusion arise, and that's a problem. That's our problem, because we invest in this self, and we say that that object is out there, and we want to manipulate that object according to our desire, one of those five desires. Or we may want to get rid of it. We may ignore it when it needs to be attended to. But that is basically the teaching, I think, of greed, hatred, and delusion. And Tendo Nyojo said, we can't reject this teaching. This is the teaching of the Buddha. How can we reject that? So, a lot of what I really wanted to talk about today was really seeing how our Zazen practice fits into these traditional teachings of Buddhism, and how that, of course, is essential for the way we live our life, and the way we, face our suffering and the suffering of others. So, of course, this as I said last week, seeing everything as an object of the self is a big problem, and it's a reason. One of the main reasons that Dogen Zenji, I think, called this teaching of his of Zazen the self-receiving and self-employing samadhi, and that means that everything is self, rather than everything is an object for me to manipulate in the way that I desire to manipulate it. And that is the way that our relationship to our greed, hatred, and delusion um, is different. So that's what we talked about more extensively, last week. And so we'll go on to talk. Well, one thing I would say about that too, that I think is important in our Zazen practice, how do we go beyond this subject-object relationship? And there are many ways to kind of think of it, but one of them that I think we understand is that, in this teaching of the 18 elements that the Buddha put forth, there's 18 elements. There's the six sense organs, and then there's the six um, objects of the sense organs, and he includes the mind as a sense organ, and then there is the contact that arises between those to make 18 elements. And the problem is in that contact, because when that arises, there's greed, hatred, and delusion. So in our Zazen, we Ucham Roshi said, for example, it's the reality before we cook it up with our thoughts. So that is Zazen itself. So one way we can say it is we become one with the object, or we are one, with the object. Um, we don't grasp this object as something separate from me. Um, so I'm going to talk about this a little bit in more detail because I think it's sort of interesting. I hope it's interesting to you. But, one way we can avoid this contact or this relationship is to completely be one with the object. There's no separation between self and object. And that, Jijuyu Zanmai, everything I encounter is myself, is my life, is self, is one way to express that. But often, I think we need other teachings too to address this, because sometimes we grasp and then we make the object, and how do we let go? So I'm going to talk about the 12-fold chain a little bit here in a moment. So I think we can, still break this cycle of contact and the arising of greed, hatred, and delusion in Zazen and in our life, in different ways. But one way we go beyond this contact is that everything we encounter, all the thoughts, all the desires, all the sensations are just as it is. So really we go beyond being one and being two. We don't say one or two, because one and two is an object of the mind. Being one with something is actually, already making it separate. So we don't comment, or we don't, grasp at all. And we are just this one piece in Zazen, this one piece with the entirety of everything. Because, this separation that happens between ourselves and our life and other people and everything happens up here, really. Mainly, that's where we grasp it and reify it, um, and that's where we, create the suffering. But actually, it happens everywhere. It happens in the body. The sensations are all part of this. But in our Zazen, we let go of all the sensations, all the thoughts, everything. It's not just thinking. It's also every other part of the five skandhas. Those four other elements of mind, plus the body. grasp that relationship. So that is one way, we can talk about Jijuyu Zanmai as going beyond the 5 desires. So also, he talked with his teacher about the 6 coverings, or the 5 or 6 coverings. And I'm going to read this little part again, just because, I think it's cool to hear what Nyojo said about this. Again, even though we read it last week, it's not that long. So he's asking, he's responding to Dogen's, question about the 5 desires and the 5 coverings. And Nyojo said, the descendants of the Buddhas and ancestors first eliminate the 5 coverings and then remove the 6 coverings. The 6 coverings consist of the 5 coverings plus the covering of ignorance. Even if a practitioner only eliminates the covering of ignorance, that practitioner will be freed of the other 5 coverings. Even if a practitioner eliminates the 5 coverings, if ignorance is not removed, the practitioner has not yet reached the practice of the Buddhas and ancestors. So this is in accordance with early Buddhism. That was what the Buddha taught, where we have greed, ignorance, and delusion. And the way that we remedy that is with wisdom. That so the 5, I'll talk about the 5 coverings, but the 6th covering is ignorance. So he's talking about we have to accord with the Buddha's teaching. We have to understand the reality, and that's the way we lead. We go beyond samsara, just the way the Buddha taught. So he's not teaching something different than what the Buddha taught. So ignorance, that 6th covering is ignorance. The 6 coverings I'll talk about in just a minute. Dogen immediately offered a prostration and expressed gratitude for this teaching. Placing his hands in shashu, he said, I have not heard of an instruction such as the one you have just given me, teacher. Elders, experienced teachers, monks, and Dharma brothers here do not at all know of this teaching. They have never spoken in this way. Today it is my good fortune to have received your great compassion through the teachings that I have never heard before. I'm sorry. It's a good fortune as a result of my connection in previous lives. And yet, I would like you to answer another question. Is there any secret method one can use to remove the 5 coverings or the 6 coverings? Any secret method? What's the teaching? He's getting the secret, getting the meat of the teachings now. And he doesn't know he's had it all the time. The teacher smiled and said, to what practice have you been devoting your entire energy? The practice is nothing other than the Dharma that removes the 6 coverings. The Buddhas and ancestors have not set up classifications in practice. They directly show us and singularly transmit the way to depart from the 5 desires and 6 coverings, and the way to be free from the 5 desires. Putting one's effort into the practice of just sitting, shikantaza, and dropping off body and mind is the way to depart from the 5 coverings and the 5 desires. This is the only method of being free from them. There is absolutely none other. So he gets a little rambunctious there. How can there be that fail into 2 or 3? But, as I said last week, it starts to sound a little dogmatic at the end, but basically, this Zazen is reality itself. So he's saying there can't be anything outside of this awakening of reality. So I don't think he's trying to be dogmatic about saying Zen only necessarily. Maybe he was. Ancient people at this time might have had more of a penchant talk in that way. We don't like it, today, but or some of us don't like it. But the point is that this zazen includes everything. So as I said last week, what he says by not setting up dichotomies or not setting up rankings or separation, he means, as the Lotus said, this great vehicle, this one vehicle, includes all of the Buddha's teaching, and actually on another level interpreted every moment and every experience, every thing is the Dharma, is the opportunity for awakening. This Shobogenzo inviting us to awaken right now. So that, to me, that is the deepest teaching of the Lotus Sutra, rather than saying, the Mahayana, the great vehicle, is sort of the true teaching as opposed to the provisional teachings of the Hinayana, and Shravaka vehicles. And there's no doubt it meant that too. But I think, these ultimate teachings, when we go deeply, we understand that this moment is the reality at offering itself up to our, to inviting us to awaken, to awaken to it. And that's what we, do in our Zazen practice. So, or that is what is done, or that is, you can't say much about it really. So anyway, go on to the 6 coverings. So this is a traditional teaching. It goes back to the early text, and the the 5 coverings are, I think they originated as obstructions to meditation originally, but they can be seen as obstructions to wisdom, to awakening, I think, in general. So they are desire, wrath or anger, dullness. Sometimes you hear sloth and torpor, dullness, and worry or agitation and remorse. Those are the 5 traditional ones. And then Nyojo Zenji, added ignorance as the 6th covering. So the important point here, I think, is that these are the 5 obstructions to wisdom. The 6 of 5 or 6 obstructions. So what happens in our zazen is wisdom. Zazen itself is wisdom. That's the Dogen Zenji's point, or Nyojo Zenji's point here, I think. So the true reality of all beings, as it says in the Lotus Sutra, or just here and now, or this reality that we awaken to, it itself is perfect awakening. So do you understand? Rather than you getting wisdom about something, or I'm speaking to you about something, the thing itself is the highest wisdom. So it's like if you talk about fire, you can describe it and you can say what it does, and you can have all of these paintings of it or whatever. But until you experience fire, you will never know what it is. Or we can describe the chemical process or whatever. We have all these different ways of intellectualizing fire, but you'll never, we can never tell somebody what fire is without them experiencing it. So, and beyond even experience. So it's the thing itself. It's the difference between getting knowledge about the thing and the thing itself. And so that's the wisdom. Wisdom, zazen itself is reality, because we let go of our separation of it. yeah, are basically the way that we separate ourselves. Although we can never separate ourselves from it, we create suffering because we think we do. So the point here, I think, is that the reality itself is wisdom. Uh, so um, yeah, that's the basic teaching, I think, of those six coverings. And of course, we can talk about those and how the reality of each of those things is very simple to see how they create suffering in our lives. You know, being too agitated, too hyper vigilant, or being sleepy and not vigilant enough. You know, um, the kind of ways that we can apply to our meditation practice, apply to the entirety, of our life as well. Um, and of course, there's, greed, hatred, and delusion. As, again, is part. Basically, it's greed, hatred, and delusion are the roots of um, these five or six coverings. So, just for so the point is here, the point of Buddhism is how do we live well? How do we go beyond our suffering? How do we live as an adult and make an offering for self and others and live well? And so all of these teachings are, to me, a different way of exploring this and talking about this. But I think it's really important for us as Zen students to understand Dogen Zenji's teaching in the context of these traditional teachings, because some people think Zen is not Buddhism. Like I've heard that before. People think it's not Buddhism, but Dogen Zen, I think we can see the direct connection. So I think it's interesting to talk about the way that we let go of these different um, ways of causing suffering in our zazen. So, one of the most traditional ways, of course, to talk about the arising of suffering is the 12-fold chain of dependent origination. And the teaching is here that if we break, any of these links, we break the entire process. But the most traditional way to go beyond this suffering is to break the first link, which is ignorance. So, this was kind of the more of the emphasis in early Buddhism, but we just talked about this, the six coverings, and how that sixth covering is ignorance. So, number one, it's ignorance. In Zazen, we remove these obstructions to wisdom. Zazen itself is wisdom. So this is one place, I think, in our Zazen that we break this chain of dependent origination. So, Zazen itself, as I said, is the reality of impermanence and non-self. That was the basic teaching of the Buddha as far as emptiness of self goes. And in Mahayana Buddhism, we say, non-self. We sometimes talk about it as interconnection, because that's another way, to talk about going beyond self and non-self, is that, the self is infinitely connected to other things. So there's no substantial thing that we can say is me. So, in our daily life, we apply this, we allow our Zazen practice to enter in everything we do, this wisdom. So this is just, to me, kind of a basic way of letting Zazen into every reaction or every interaction that we have. I mean, I'll talk a little bit more about it in a moment, but basically, we just say Zazen is the center of my life. I don't do Zazen in order to get better or to somehow augment my life, but I allow Zazen to teach me and guide me and be my deepest refuge. Because Zazen is wisdom, the reality of just here and now, or the reality of all things manifesting, as awakening. So, all right, the next one then you see on the link 6, and we have the 18 elements. We have the contact, as I was telling you before. I just explained this. And that also relates to the 5 desires that Myojo Zenji, talked about. So in our Zazen, as I just said, we become one with the object. We go beyond 1 and 2. We don't grasp, the object. That means everything is self. And we've studied magnanimous mind, before, but Dogen Zenji talked about magnanimous mind in Tenzo Kyokun. And that means one of the ways we express that is everything I encounter is my life. Everything, another way we say it is everything is self. That's what, Jijuyu Zanmai means. Everything I encounter is my life, is the self. We can say everything I encounter is not self or beyond self too. But, we can say it this way because I think part of the reason we say it this way is that we make some offering in our bodhisattva practice. We employ the self. We employ all things as an offering. So sometimes it's hard to say, how do we, make an offering, or how do we, employ ourselves if there is no self. But this is really the self, of course, beyond individuality and beyond the universal perspective, beyond form and emptiness. Or it's not beyond form and emptiness, but beyond our ideas of form, of what form and emptiness are, because there's nothing else but form, and emptiness. But we separate them out and say they're 2 different things. Anyway, so also there's I thought it was interesting too. I think we see the 4 noble truths here. This is link number 8, craving. And this is what the Buddha says in the 4 noble truths is the cause of suffering. And to me, craving has to do with, it's rooted in the past and the future. We crave either something that already happened, or we crave some former part of ourselves or some experience that we had, or we crave something in the future. We want things to be different than now. In other words, now isn't good enough. There's something better in the past and the future other than now. So what is Zazen? It's here and now. There is no craving. We let go of craving. But that's the way we really go beyond craving. Craving comes up. What am I going to have for lunch today? Or that guy was really a jerk to me yesterday. It comes up, we let it go. Just here and now. And in our Zazen practice, we really see, especially when you do a sesshin or something, all of these emotions come up, and the anger can be so real, or the despair can be so real, or the criticism or whatever it might be can be so real. But all you're doing is staring at a wall for 14 periods of Zazen a day. There's no, there's no jerk there in front of you. It's all a phantom from the past that you're giving so much power. So this is, I think directly related to the Four Noble Truths and what the Buddha said. So same thing in our, in our daily life, as I said, we encounter someone, and the entire world, the most important thing in the world is the encounter of that person. That is self. We're not thinking about, oh, I can't wait to get through talking to this person so that I can go, watch YouTube or something, when I'm really gonna, have something real and fun. It's like, or I don't say to myself, man, I wish, you know, I weighed the same as I did 10 years ago, or that I was I was better looking the way that I was 10 years ago, or whatever it might be. We most people have some feeling like that come up. Of course, that is a human thing, but there's a difference between it coming up and grasping it as the reality. There's a huge difference. Um, So, yeah, our suffering's usually, as I said here, rooted in some regret in the past, or some desire for the past, or some longing, for the future, or some way that now isn't good enough. And so, actually, the reality is that the only way that we can meet the karma of the past, or meet um, the fruition, the healthy and wholesome fruition of what we have done or what has happened in the past, is now, is here and now. So, we study Buddha's teaching, and we implement it now, by letting go, by doing zazen, or by, when we do encounter someone, understanding that is self. That is not an object for um, my desire. But if we study things just for the sake of, studying them, and it's like, as my teacher would say, it's like studying recipes without cooking. If we think so, we actually, Dogen Zenji said that studying itself is an expression of awakening if we approach it here and now wholeheartedly. You know, I don't study necessarily just to become better in the future. That's included. The future is included here and now. But if I only study, just for some future event, it's really not. We're not here. We're not here and now. But of course, we use those things in the future. This future that doesn't really exist. This concept that we call the future. But it's the kind of relative and absolute perspective in one. So the only way we take care of our life truly and deeply, past and future, is right now. And Zazen is right now. That's the sort of ultimate expression of right now, is Zazen. So, but that means we might learn something that we use in the future, so we don't negate trying to improve this body and mind in order to practice in a more healthy way in the future. But we understand it can only be done right now. So, okay, number 9, link number 9 is clinging. And this, is what the Buddha called the 5 skandhas, the 5 clinging skandhas. And he said, when we depart from the 5 skandhas, or when we cast off the 5 skandhas, they become just the 5 skandhas. And so that's what Dogen Zenji said about, that's why he said dropping off body and mind, I think. There are 5 skandhas. One is form, and the other 4 are mind. So one body and one mind. And the form, goes beyond individual, goes beyond subject and object. Buddha didn't make a distinction between inside and outside the person. So that's what we've talked about this before. So this is what Ujjayi Roshi I think called opening the hand of thought. So it's another way in our zazen, when we do realize that we're clinging to this self, these 5 skandhas, this person, I'm comparing myself to you, or I'm comparing this situation to something else, and I'm evaluating the worth of it according to these 5 skandhas. I'm defining the object, according to these 5 skandhas. Then we let go, and that's one thing I think, that Ujjayi Roshi called that opening the hand of thought, or Dogen Zenji called it dropping off body and mind. So let's see what else. So it's important because, when, as it says here, when the world is centered around these 5 skandhas, that's when we objectify this. You see how all of these teachings are interconnected and include and expound on each other. These teachings of the Buddha, they cross over. And so when these 5 skandhas are the most important thing in the world, that's when we create suffering for ourselves. When we, drop the 5 skandhas, the entirety of the universe is revealed, is open to us. As far as our ability to learn something new, for example, or to express something beyond thinking or beyond our understanding in the moment, to be guided by the wisdom of Zazen, something beyond thinking. So again, that's when we encounter things as beyond self and other, as this Jijuyu Zanmai. So sometimes, there's some distinct understanding that what we just did wasn't ourselves. I think in Sesshin, we really understand that we're carried. And sometimes in our interaction with other people, we understand that some compassion or some wisdom was being manifest that we ourselves could never have come up with, So, I think we all know what this experience, but okay, just about through here. So let's see, I made a note about number 10. And number 10 is becoming, I think. This is all of these change, this the reification of the self over and over again. Traditionally, it's talked about, too, in terms of rebirth, the becoming, just the whole cycle of becoming starts over again. But this happens in every moment, too. This becoming, this grasping the self, this grasping of the self and object relationship. So yeah, I think that's all I had to say about this thing here, and I think that's all I have to say today. So I will quit screen sharing and see if we have any comments today or any questions. Lacey had something. Shashu, yeah. The Shashu, oh, sorry, let's see, I muted myself. It's, yeah, it's a Shashu uh, hand, it's like a mudra, yeah.
So, isn't that when we do our bows and then we end the bow and we do sashu?
Shashu, yeah, Shashu.
Sashu. Is there an etiquette or a significance to that when it says in this sutra that you're talking about, placing his hands in shashu? It says, is that the natural etiquette, or is there some kind of significance in that?
You know, I have not studied Shashu. I think it's just my understanding, my limited understanding of it is that it's a mudra, just like the cosmic mudra that we do during Zazen, but it's something that we can do um, while we're standing usually. So usually we don't stand up, doing this. And, um, you know, uh, um, the cosmic mudra, of course, is a way. I mean, we could talk a lot about mudras and what they mean, especially in esoteric Buddhism, which I don't know a lot about. But this is a way, it was thought that somehow the way that we hold our hands or our body has a deep relationship to, the rest of the universe. And in basic, Dogen Zenji called um, Zazen the Buddha Mudra. So, in other words, I mean, to me, in Zen teaching, that means we become one piece, with the universe, or we let go of this kind of, separation. Ancient people thought there was some way that we could affect the universe or receive its energy, or whatever way you want to call it, by doing certain things with the hands or saying certain things in Dharanis and so forth. But and so that's basically what I think Shashu is a mudra, but not a mudra as we would think of it in those ways of making some kind of effect to get something that we desire, but rather to express, the entirety. And so I think, that is a way, like when we're in the Zendo, we walk in Shashu just as a way of expressing um, this mudra. When we're walking in the Zendo, we're doing Zazen. And when we're bowing, we're doing Zazen. And really, whenever we do anything, our aspiration as students of the way is to express this reality of Zazen, or awakening. And so the mudra, in that situation, especially with one's teacher, that's a formal kind of encounter too. And so he did 6 prostrations, to his teacher as well, which is another, expression of gratitude, and also, respect and unity and devotion. So all of those things are part of our zazen. When we talk about it in limited ways, we can talk about it in those particular ways that we have to take some perspective with.
And then follow-up question too. Did I hear you correctly say at one point, if you can get rid of the 6th covering, you get rid of all of the coverings?
Yeah, Nyojo said that. Tendo Nyojo said that, yeah.
And say it. But it's not just that you just don't know. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's traditionally it's expressed a lot of different ways of what this ignorance is and what this wisdom is. You know, it's ignorance of the Four Noble Truths, or ignorance of dependent origination, ignorance of non-self, and ignorance of Mahayana Buddhism, or emptiness, we can call it, or actually, early Buddhism called it emptiness too, but we would call emptiness, impermanence and interconnection. So, but in Mahayana Buddhism, I think, and in Dogen Zenji's teaching, especially, wisdom is practice. So that's why in the Heart Sutra it says, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, when deeply practicing Prajnaparamita, clearly saw that all five skandhas are empty. And so that wisdom, the ignorance, disappears as practice. That is Dogen Zenji's teaching. That's the teaching of the Heart Sutra, I think. Avalokiteshvara didn't get wisdom, but it wasn't talking about wisdom. It was he or she was doing wisdom, or being done by wisdom. So the reality itself, is wisdom. And so when we practice, we go beyond that separation between the reality and this individual person. The nature of our entire body and mind is ignorance if we cling to it. But all of those different ways, we can talk about ignorance, all those different, sort of traditional ways. But, greed, hatred, and delusion, the medicine that the Buddha, talked about for that was ignorance. Wisdom. Greed, hatred, and ignorance. So that's one of the three poisonous minds. Yeah. So we would say it's practice itself. That's Dogen Zenji's teaching. The practice, the reality, the wisdom of all things beyond self and other manifest when we practice. You're welcome.
If I may, I appreciate the idea of allowing, of not practicing to changing ourselves, but allowing Zazen to teach. I'm currently working with Matsu and Nanye, polishing a tile, reading what Dogen has to say with that through Zazen Shin and the Eternal Mirror, and the idea of not grasping and opening our hands while we're sitting Zazen, opening the hand of thought. There's still like an element of working towards something, or an element of letting go. So there's still that practice. So there's still polishing, and I really am drawn to that tension point where Zazen is kind of the manifestation of both of those, of sitting to subtly change our lives, but also sitting to realize that there needs to be no change. And I really appreciate the way that you framed that, not sitting to change, but allowing Zazen to teach. So yeah, thank you for today, and thanks for letting me join it.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I appreciate that comment. And I think, we state it in many different ways. Oh, I'm sorry. I was, Laura, could I just make one brief comment? And I'm sorry I was muted and didn't realize I was talking to only myself. So I just wanted to say that I appreciate what you said, Alex, and you're very welcome. Thank you for coming and sharing your practice with us. And, in the Buddhist teaching, or in Zen, in Mahayana Buddhism, we have these two sort of perspectives that we talk about, ultimate and relative truth. And the relative truth is that, we're suffering and we need some medicine. But when we investigate those elements of suffering, we find that they're empty, and that is part of the medicine. So, but if we just say they're empty and so we forget about it, that's not real medicine. It doesn't stop our suffering. But so there's this other element of just here and now is complete awakening. And Dogen Zenji's never said, don't polish the tile or don't try to improve. How can we live well if we don't study our karma and our delusions and, try to do better? But if we do that in order to get some goal, to do some thing in the future that we call, kensho or awakening, I think in his idea, he said, that's a mistake. We have to do it now, only as now as what I was saying before. So the thing is, in Zazen, these two contradictory perspectives are poof. It's very confusing to human beings because we think it has to be one perspective or the other. Either we don't need to change ourselves and everything is okay, which is true from one perspective. This moment, this being is complete, perfect enlightenment. On the other hand, you might tell somebody off in the parking lot if they pull out in front of you and create, suffering for yourself, or run into their car accidentally because you're distracted or whatever. And so we need to work on what makes us angry and understand how to do better and work with our anger better. But, Dogen Zenji's teaching really is that both of these perspectives are completely realized in Zazen. And we don't have to worry, about realizing them in Zazen. Afterwards, when we get off the cushion, then that's another story. But in our Zazen practice itself, that's where we can really let the burden of these five skandhas down. And when we learn how to be fully present here and now, then we take care of both the ultimate and the relative, realm in that way. So I appreciate the point, because Zazen is the ultimate beyond relative and ultimate. It is beyond our dichotomy that we make up between these two views of kind of relative and absolute perspectives. Okay. All right, Lara, I think you had a comment.
I was thinking about ignorance, the point that Lacey had brought up. We had recently, like last week, we had to take out a buckthorn, and with the buckthorn coming out, because it's an invasive
thing. It was right up against the fence. It was doing a lovely job of blocking a neighbor's pool activity. So we take out the buckthorn, and I decided that we should also take out a yew, like get it down to size because it's so badly scaled with the house. And all of a sudden, things have been taken out, and I can see new perspectives. So I can see this huge maple is looking beautiful, right where the buckthorn was dominating. And then the yew comes out, and I start to see that this tree my neighbor has is huge, and I always wondered what tree this is. I don't know any plants in our area, and it's deciduous and it has cones, so that makes it easy to kind of look up, and it's huge. So I have been living here for like 15 years, and I did not know that there is a redwood
Wow.
like right beside our house. So I was thinking about the long road it took. Like it was, Zazen helped me to accept that the buckthorn had to go. I don't like killing living things, and my neighbor had also taken out a perfectly good tree this year. And I was like delaying doing this, but it focused my mind last year when the buckthorn decided to send out like million saplings right underneath, and we also were starting to see, I was anyway, I'm the only one that cares about the garden, buckthorn in the front, so buckthorn had to go. So I think like that's how much ignorance that I was operating under. I never knew what a buckthorn was. Then I thought it would be a nice dye plant to keep. Then I had to realize that no, this is a problem and it needs to go. And then I had to actually want to make it go. And in all of that, now I'm seeing everything differently when I look outside my window. And I've collected these tiny little redwood cones, and I'm going to dye with them and see what they are as dye material. Because I've had the buckthorn 4 years, never dyed with it. So I was thinking like also ignorance means like I was reading Stonehouse and Red Pine's introduction about it, and apparently Stonehouse is a Chinese master who he went on to be a master, and he was a hermit, and his first teacher called him an ignorant donkey and sent him away to a second teacher. And it was at the second teacher that he was recognized as having been enlightened after many years. So like the process of unpacking ignorance might have been like serving in a temple for years and getting zero instruction and still feeling completely ignorant. And also in my language, you call someone ignorant when they're angry. when you just like lose your mind, like you are ignorant. So I think breaking ignorance is such a big thing because we're conditioned to be ignorant. I was conditioned not to really care what that tree was, and now I care very much because its roots might be in my house. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Lara. It's a good analogy. You know, we can be so fixed and at knowing what and that we don't see. You know, we don't see really what needs to be done in front of us because we're so sure that we have the answer already. I think that's really the opposite of what Dogen Zenji and Myojo Zenji called the flexible mind. That we have a fixed idea of how things have to be or should be, and we don't actually see what's happening in front of us. And you see, and sometimes it's going on in a way that we don't understand. So it reminded me of invasive species in general, or all the difficult things and bad things that have happened in the environment because we thought we knew, some way was a good way to do things and failed to see its effect because we were so focused on one aspect rather than the entirety, of the reality of life. So you saw that with, of course, the most popular examples are like with, wolves being taken out and, bald eagles taken out and so forth by pesticides. But over and over again, there's so many other examples that we could use, but we see something in ourselves or we see something in the environment and we're absolutely sure, like we can't, we can't kill, for example. So if we take that as just a literal ultimate teaching that can never be violated, we might have some problem. So here at Gyobutsuji, um, we have to break precepts. Sometimes I have to kill wasps. One year, somebody was coming that was allergic to wasps, and so I had to make the choice: well, do I kill wasps or do I, allow someone to get sick or extremely, endangered? And in some ways, we do these things, and it's an act of repentance, because if we think that is the reality, that human beings are innately more important than wasps, ultimately there's a problem there. But as human beings, we're always probably going to value an individual life over a wasp nest. That's what human beings do. But we have to understand that's a kind of delusion. To the wasps, they've lost their entire community in their life, and we have to take responsibility for that. But so in some ways, we're always in this continual process of sort of vow and repentance, coming back and taking responsibility and trying to broaden, our perspective. But and the teaching is too, I think, that, not only are we encountering this kind of ignorance or remedying this ignorance by a long process, a lifelong process, a lifelong work of art that we call these five skandhas. But the kind of beautiful thing about Dogen Zenji's teaching is that, at any particular moment, we can express complete awakening, if we're just here and now. So we don't have to sort of despair when we see how limited we are and how many mistakes we've made. And we have another opportunity to perform an act of compassion or an act of wisdom, and to express enlightenment. So both of these kind of perspectives are there. This kind of sudden expression and this ongoing, gradual work in progress, as well, are both there. But sometimes we come to these places where, as you say, we just see something beyond what we saw before. Like you took down the trees, and maybe actually for the tree itself, it's not so healthy to be the most, to take over all the rest of the environment. Eventually, something like a cancer in the body, kills its host. It doesn't. It's not healthy to be out of balance either. So sometimes we we have to go beyond our own ideas of what enlightenment and what delusion is even. I mean, we absolutely have to actually. That's actually the teaching. We absolutely have to go beyond our ideas of what it is. and express it. So one thing I remember I was saying about that is, and we talked about this last week, sort of, that some people think in Zen we don't have any kind of insight, experience, or in Dogen Zenji's teaching, but you can see in this conversation with his teacher, when, as Lacey said, he put his hands in shashu and he did these 6 prostrations, you could just kind of feel that he saw something he'd never seen before, and he didn't ride on a lotus sutra, a lotus blossom into the sky, probably, the way they showed it in the movie, but he definitely, there was some insight, that he had not had before. And this is the way that he wrote about dropping off body and mind, rather than, what we find in Keizan's record that does have him have some kind of kensho, experience. He never wrote about that in that way. But you can obviously see him feeling a deep gratitude and opening, an opening of his heart and mind here in this, situation with his teacher. And sometimes something like that happens. We take down some view, and a world of possibility opens up, seemingly. Okay, wow, it's very late, so it's probably time to go, unless anybody has anything else they'd like to say. Any other comments?